All right. Hello to all of you zooming in from California and other parts of the world. We welcome you to WEED Art and Education number 11 to spotlight the work of WEED member Lorraine Bonner, a Bay Area-based artist, retired physician, and educator. WEED Eco Artist Dialogue was founded in 1996 and is a volunteer-run collective of women-identified visual artists, writers, curators, art historians, researchers, scientists, and others interested in highlighting the intersection of art and ecological issues. I'm Mary White, one of the co-chairs, along with our host, co-chair Manoush Somwaradinia, and another board member, Christina Bertia. We'll start with a land acknowledgement. And if you wish, in the chat, please add your location and land acknowledgement. WEED's office stands in the territory of the Wichen, the ancestral and unseceded land of the Chichonio-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona tribe of Alameda County, near one of the largest shell mounds in the Bay Area. The land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muiwak Ohlone tribe and other familiar descendants of the Verona band. We recognize the Muwekma, I always say this wrong, I'm sorry, Muwekma Ohlone tribe, who are campaigning to become federally recognized, the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, who are researching, revitalizing, and preserving Ramaytush Ohlone history and culture, and the Confederated Villages of Luzon and the Socorro Land Trust, who are working to return native land back to Indigenous stewardship, including in Berkeley. A little Zoom housekeeping. We're recording this presentation. Please keep your audio muted during the presentation. And if there is noise, the host may mute you. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat for this questions section. We'll stop the first recording after Lorraine's presentation and immediately start a second recording for questions and answers. And our series on art and education has been trying to bring forth really interesting and kind of different approaches to how people use their skills to educate as artists. So we're looking forward to this. Board member Christina Bertia will now introduce Lorraine. Thank you.
Christina, you are muted. Please unmute yourself.
I'm very pleased to introduce my friend Lorraine. She was born in New York City. She had an early aptitude for science and eventually became a physician. At the age of 38, suppressed memories of severe childhood sexual abuse began erupting into her consciousness. Although she had never had interest nor training in art, within a few years, she was drawn to clay, using it to express experiences and feelings for which she had no words. Gradually, the clay began to expand her understanding, placing what had happened to her in the larger context of planetary betrayal and exploitation. She believes that bearing witness is the first step towards transformation. In her own words, I was someone who knew nothing of art, yet art came to me like a life raft to a person flailing in the open sea. The early personal sculptures, almost all too painful to share, gradually became more accessible, then moved into imagery that linked my suffering to the world's, my healing to our healing. My presentation will illustrate how art guided me from the devastating memories of my past into deeper meditations on humanity, the essential nature of trust and trustworthiness in human society, and what it means to be broken and mended, and prophetic images of the future, including an unflinching recognition of the possibility of extinction. So welcome, Lorraine.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Mary and Manoush and WEED for giving me the opportunity to present my work here. I'm just going to start right in. Can everybody see the image?
Yes.
Okay, good. This is called Extracting the Perpetrator. It was a real turning point for me. I made it in 1999, almost 15 years after I first realized that my childhood, although it had been mostly forgotten, had not been normal. I started working in clay earlier in the 90s. Many of the pieces illustrated what even now I find difficult to say. Oh, shoot. Ah, there you are. This is one, her head fell off in the fire, but I really needed her, so I glued it back on, which is true. You can kind of barely see there's a little crack at the neck of the mother type figure. By this time, I was taking classes at Merritt, the local community college, learning more about the medium of clay and making larger pieces. I had spent time in 12-step programs for incest survivors and was thinking deeply about perpetrators, which were defined in the meetings as people who betrayed a trust. I was thinking a lot about trust and trustworthiness and what it means to call oneself a survivor. Many people don't like the term victim, and I don't agree with this particularly. I was tortured as an infant and child, and I survived. The fact that I survived doesn't make me any less a victim. I think when we attach shame to victimhood and refuse to use the term, we make the perpetrator more invisible than they already are. How does it happen that many people today use the word we to describe the desecration of our planet as if they have some agency in what the fossil fuel industry and the agricultural industries are perpetrating? When I think of myself as a victim, I am clear that someone has done something harmful to me. For a long time, I believed the popular idea that we all have the capacity to do horrible, ghastly things to one another. I've come to think of this a little differently now. I think there is a range of coercion that can be applied to any given person to force them to harm another. The person who is coerced into violating the biologically innate resistance to harming another human being, or another being generally, often suffers moral injury and even PTSD. They may feel there is something wrong with them. This kind of injuring is becoming more recognized, but in specific industries ranging from slaughterhouses to hospitals, and of course the military. But it is much more deeply a part of our social structure than we are able, maybe willing, to absorb. The source of the coercion is virtually invisible. You might ask yourself the question, as I have many times, why do we have to pay money for food? You can get very tangled up in this. Why do we need money at all? But for me, I have an image of the first moments when the person representing the colonizing power told the first victim of colonization, a farmer, that now, in addition to growing food for themselves and their community, they also had to pay a tax. And to pay the tax, they had to have money. And to get money, they had to grow and sell food, more food than their environment could support. This is an example of moral injury, which metastasizes like any cancer. I reserve the term perpetrator for the person who is doing the coercing. Instead of thinking there is something wrong with me, I think there is something wrong with them. I can separate myself from that person and extract the perpetrator from myself. I didn't realize at the time that extracting the perpetrator was the beginning of a series. But during my time at Merritt, I discovered a beautiful clay body, which was called Cassius at that time, but is now known as obsidian. This clay becomes a satin black when fired, and became a kind of avatar for myself, other victims of abuse and oppression, not only humans, but animals, plants, and the earth herself. Many other pieces flowed from the black clay, studying the perpetrator, which led me deep into the nature-nurture debate about criminals, politicians, and CEOs, those who without conscience or empathy create conditions which are profoundly harmful. Perpetrator is someone who betrays a trust. Trust is fundamental to human survival. Infants must depend on the trustworthiness of the adults on whom they depend. Everyone in a society has to be able to trust one another in order for all to survive. This is what is meant by the term pro-social. If having a capacity for pro-social behavior is intrinsic to being human, what does that say about those who behave in antisocial ways, who are untrustworthy, who steal and lie, and don't feel the normal sense of guilt and shame? Are some perpetrators born, others created by oppressive systems? How can we tell the difference? Is there a spectrum? What do we do about them? When I was first recovering memories of my childhood abuse, like everyone else, I was reading Alice Miller and absorbing the, quote, hurt people, unquote, theory of the origin of perpetrators. But as I thought more about it, it seemed inadequate. Most people who were hurt do not become hurters. Some enter the healing professions, they become doctors, nurses, therapists, and others trying to give to others the healing they need themselves. Some others may withdraw from most human contact. Some get into therapy themselves and get better. Some make an effort to not do what was done to them and have really great children. I also discovered a lot of literature on psychologists studying persons diagnosed with sociopathic, psychopathic, and antisocial personality disorders. And I began to look at the neurological underpinnings of social behavior. It seemed to me that there are people who have something or lack something that makes it easy for them to hurt other beings. Even so, many of them do not hurt others. There are a lot of factors that go into pro and antisocial behavior. A lot of things have to go wrong for people to actually carry out acts of perpetration. But I think this is important because it suggests that even in an ideal social organization, should we ever achieve such a thing, it still might be possible that a person lacking in trustworthiness might be born and do actual harm before it is recognized. This is obviously an area in need of further investigation. Inside the head of studying the perpetrator is the germ of another piece. Internalized perpetration illustrates the way that perpetrators get inside our heads and convince us that our suffering is our own fault, that only individual effort will free us. Whole sections of bookstores and libraries are full of the kind of self-help books that encourage us to ignore the systemic obstacles, the racism, misogyny, xenophobia, homophobia, centuries of cultivation of outright hatred of anyone even slightly different, the underfunded public services of education, health, and transportation, to ignore all of that in order to maintain the perpetrator's dominant place in society. It is, in my opinion, delusional and futile to imagine that widening inequality and the ravaging of the ecosystem could somehow be overcome by cultivating inner peace. On the other hand, it is important to recognize that many of the pillars of perpetration have been deeply implanted into our thinking and language. The very American value of individualism has led to the corrosion of our ability to care for others. The theft of land and labor, which is the foundation of our economy, trickles down to creating a thriving industry of security locks, keys, and guns. Racism becomes a major tool in maintaining hierarchy, as everyone in society strives to be not Black. Even in some cases, people who are socially defined as Black. But as the clay reminds us, we are all Black to the perpetrators, all food to the insatiable. At some point in showing these Black and white sculptures, I realized from the feedback I was hearing that many people were making the understandable connection between the names of the colors of the clay and the names of the colors that are socially assigned to certain people. Many people thought, understandably, that the Black clay represented the Black people and the white clay represented white people. Of course, it's not that simple. The problem made me go deeper, to think about Black and white and the colors of human skin. And the fact that all of us, with the exception of people with albinism, have the pigment melanin in our skin. How absurd it is to differentiate people on the basis of the quantity of melanin in their skin, to impoverish, starve, deny medical care and education on the basis of melanin. This led to another series, Multi-Hued Humanity and the Redemption of Black. Not only was I representing all of us as one species with varied skin tones, but I also was asserting the sacred archetype value of Black as equal to white. Somehow this relationship has gotten out of balance, and Black has become associated with contamination, criminality, danger, and dirt. Dirt, the earth, which is the source of all our food. Think of the ways that we use the words Black and dark, how we all immediately understood the meaning of the dark side of the force. In old Westerns, the bad guys always wore black hats. Notice how often Black is shorthand for evil in language and even art. The feminine and receptive also attributes of the yin, the Black, have also been devalued. The ocean has become a garbage dump. The rivers are shackled with dams. Groundwaters are sucked dry. Meanwhile, white is exalted, a symbol of purity and holiness, and yang, the male force, has taken possession of the entire planet and is driving it to extinction. In the process, Black has been caged and white blinded. In this piece, Multi-Hued Humanity frees Black from the weight of white. White has chained Black, but Black and white are not people. People are the hands, all of us, all colors, all languages, all abilities, all genders, working together to break the chains of hierarchy and exploitation. I meditated a lot on the yin yang symbol. and expressed it in several pieces. What would happen if we, in our white, male, yang-dominated society, could begin to honor the yin, the Black feminine, in some balanced way? Would that help quiet some of the fires raging out of control? Would expressing our love for the deep dark of the ocean, the cool rivers, help the waters as they cling to life? Could this inner work translate into the collective action needed for liberation? In these pieces, I developed a technique that involved using clay bodies of many degrees of brown coloring in a way that enabled all the colors to show up as the skin of the piece. My thought here was that anyone, whatever their socially defined color, who approached the work could potentially find their own skin color represented in the sculpture. The torsos were also becoming more deliberately androgynous. I didn't want to exclude anyone. We are more than even we know. This multi-hued person is our future. People represented by the Black clay, deeply melanated people of this country and people in the global South are even now creating the vision and form of the time to come. Mind and heart, genius and courage, a flowering of Black. Today, people who have been designated as white are seeing the rights and identity they thought they had slipping away. Their eyes are opening to the truths that many people designated as Black have been telling them all along, such as the reality of police violence, the criminalization of protest, and that everything from bodily autonomy to voting rights are vulnerable to violent actors. Meanwhile, issues such as leadership, organizational strategies, and intersectionalities are all being deeply investigated by Black and Global South intellectuals and activists. Ecuador became the first country in the world to accord legal rights to Pachamama, the Mother Earth. In America, the earth is legally recognized only as property, a wealth-producing commodity, not as a living being. But like all marginalized beings, the earth is rising up in protest and resistance. Starting in 2015, I had a series of surgical adventures which led me more deeply into issues of brokenness and mending. In particular, the Japanese mending techniques of kintsugi. In this practice, broken items are mended with gold, becoming more beautiful and valuable in their flaws. It is hard for me. I'm just going to be straight here and honest. It is hard for me to think of my life broken in infancy, my present day surgical scars, not to mention the continents and people ravaged by colonialism, slavery, and wars, somehow made more beautiful in the mending. But the universe doesn't care what I think or can imagine. It sends the images, and I do my best to manifest them. Some of these cross series, such as Rescue, where the broken and mended child is held by multi-hued hands. I would like to leave on this hopeful note, but then in 2022, I was compelled to spend the entire year creating an installation on the theme of extinction. It consists of 100 clay coffins on tables, each coffin containing some item related to our life on Earth, of humans in this place, this time in particular. I exhibited it the first time at the Dia de los Muertos in Somarts in San Francisco last fall, but it is still relevant, and I hope to show it again. These are some images of individual coffins and their contents. It is difficult to look at the accelerating pace of global warming with all the attendant catastrophes and the exclamations by climate scientists that everything is happening faster and with greater intensity than expected, and not feel hopeless, powerless. And grief, terror, rage, larger than that most of us have ever experienced in normal life. This is an extraordinary experience. This is not an ordinary, oh yeah, fall down, dust yourself off, get back up again. This is the end of everything. Having experienced enormous grief, rage, and terror in my childhood, I understand the power of the absolutely existential need for denial. It is not surprising that people being woke, quote unquote, is a major threat to the perpetrators controlling our lives. We are living the movie, Don't Look Up. But not quite. It's not going to be a planet hitting us, an asteroid. It's something we have some control over. My life was heading towards suicide before I realized there was nothing wrong with me, that I was a victim and I could extract the perpetrator from my body and soul. We can't stop the climate catastrophe. Too many degrees of warming are already, so to speak, baked in. Too many tipping points have or are about to be passed. What we can do is make it less bad. What we think of as civilization will not survive. But perhaps some fragments of the human species might live, might remember the bitter fruits of commodifying everything, might regain the awareness of the sacred that animates the planet. Like a person with a terminal illness, we can enter this time of hospice with goals. Audre Lorde gave us the deep truth that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. We need new tools, and we need to create them as we go. We need to remember and recreate ways of living with each other, with the earth, and with all of her children. Ways that are humble and sustainable. But that will only happen if we can get past denial and paralysis of will. And that is my intention with this piece of art, which I now have titled, Is This What You Want? That's really it. I know it's not quite long enough. Are there questions?
Well, thank you, Lorraine. This is great. What we're going to do is just remind everybody this is WEED presentation, art and education that we have every other month, and that WEED is a nonprofit collaborative event, and any donations are welcomed. So we thank you for your presentation. So what we'll do is stop this recording, and then we'll start up a second recording for questions. And I hope everybody will open up their screen so we can see you all and have some kind of dialogue.